We're talking about India mostly in this section, and the first folks to get there were the Portuguese, okay, and they established three primary trading ports, and those were Malacca and Brandon? Goa. And the one we talked about in section 1 that Da Gama started, Calicut. So Malacca, Goa, and Calicut. And if you're curious, they're on the board behind me. Now the ruling power, get to the rocking in your chair, Ludke. The ruling power in India at this time was the Mughal Empire, the Mughal Empire. They were a large and powerful empire, but not very technologically advanced. And so when the Europeans start showing up, the path of least resistance for the Mughals is just to let them set up their little trading posts in the Indian cities and kind of deal with them rather than try and fight them off. It wasn't worth it at that point. The Portuguese, in order to control the territory that they occupy in India, need some kind of an enforcement. They need some strongmen. They need a police force of sorts. And they're not going to bring the Portuguese army over to India. Instead, they hire Indian soldiers and employ them. And those Indian soldiers who work for Europeans are called sepoys. Indian soldiers who work for Europeans are called sepoys. Now, I'm being very careful not to say the Indian soldiers employed by the Portuguese, because all Indian soldiers who work for whatever European power they work for are called sepoys. Now, the Portuguese don't dominate all European trade with India for long. They're the first ones there, but they don't maintain supremacy over trade with India for long. Next along are whom? The Dutch. The Dutch come along. Now, when the Dutch come along, they don't come along in the form of, hey, we're the Netherlands, the country, and we're here to trade with you. They do it differently. They form the first corporation. They form the first corporation in the world. Anybody know what it's called? Dutch East India Company. Good. And the Dutch East India Company gets to set up trade in India, and it conducts trade for its own profit. Okay? They're trading for their own benefit and the benefit of their shareholders. Now, since they're a company, they're going to have some trouble controlling territory, because a company is much different than a country. Portugal goes over and sets up its trading post and it says, this land is ours, so they control it. A company doesn't get to do that. They don't get to have power over their land. So, they have to be granted a special power or privilege. And they are granted sovereignty, which means they get to rule the land they occupy. And once they have sovereignty, they're sovereign, they're the ultimate power in their land, and that's what sovereign means, then they too begin to employ sepoys. The Dutch East India Company also employs sepoys. Very glad the camera wasn't turned over here for that little dance. I've got to get that knee looked at. So, as the Dutch gain in power in India, the Portuguese are declining in power. At the same time, the Mughals are diminishing in power as well. Now, part of the reason the Mughals are diminishing is because they have had very inconsistent leadership. Very inconsistent leadership. The problem in the Mughal Empire is how the next king would come to the throne. Now, it's not actually different than it is in Europe. Dad dies, the son takes the throne, the eldest son takes the throne. Dad dies, the eldest son takes the throne. Great. Except that, for some reason, culturally, in India, very often the son didn't want to wait for dad to just go ahead and die on his own. And so dad might be poisoned. Dad might have his throat slit. Dad might literally be jumped and beaten to death by his eldest son. Or if dad had a particularly strong grip on the throne, didn't seem like he was going to be easy to off, the brothers, not liking the eldest brother, might form a partnership and off the eldest brother so that the next oldest would get to rule and maybe share power with his other brother. But what inevitably happens to the other brother once the next oldest gets in power? He could fall down a flight of stairs, disappear in the jungle, who knows? Yeah. So they have succession problems in the Mughal Empire. And so what Dad would start doing after, witnessing this, Dad says, well, you know what, this son, he's smart, and I'm afraid he's coming after me. So he would have this son blinded. Because if you blind him, he's not as much of a threat to you. It's kind of hard for a blind man to sneak silently into your bedchamber at night and slit your throat. Right? You kind of hear that coming, right? So what you end up with is not the best trained and the most able coming to power to rule in the empire. You end up with what's left, what survived. The person who makes it the longest on Wipeout. Okay? And the other thing that happens is civil war between the siblings. And they'll get their little part of India to fight this other little part of India while Dad's still on the throne, and so he's trying to fight them both. And money is just wasted, and the empire begins to wither. They're not spending money on their people. They're not spending money on growing the empire and strengthening it. They're spending money on their own survival. And so the leaders really take the empire down. Now, what draws sharks to a feeding frenzy in the ocean? Blood. The smell of the Mughal Empire weakening in the world draws some sharks to feed on its carcass as well, to take its land that the Mughals are no longer controlling very well. Who are the first two new European countries to feed on the carcass of the Mughal Empire? Who shows up? We've already got the Portuguese and the Dutch.
British and French.
The British and the French. Oh yeah, they're all about it. They're all about it. Because although the British and French have now gotten to North America and they're exploring over there, the way they're going about it doesn't bring quick riches. Trading with India does. India's got the spices. They've got cotton. They've got gems. And that's easy money. That's trade goods right away. Whereas in the Americas, you got to set up trading posts, and you got to go out and you got to kill the animals, and then you got to skin them. And it's just, you got to cut down the trees, and it's all kinds of work, and it takes time. India, it's just pull up, trade, out, cha-ching, all the way to the bank. Okay? So both the British East India Company and the French East India Company will emerge to conduct British and French trade in India as well. Okay? What? Oh, we can't forget about Spain. Spain's too important. But Spain doesn't mess with India. They recognize that there's easier pickings in the area. And thanks to Mr. Magellan, Spain already has the Philippines. And they will hold the Philippines alone for the next several hundred years. And it will be Spain's base of operations in Asia. Okay. Philippines, 2 P's, 1 L. Philip Pines. Philip Pines. Who do you suppose was king of Spain when the Philippines were claimed for Spain? King Philip II. So Philippines. Got it? Questions over this section? And no, you don't have to know Albuquerque.
Does Philip have 2 L's?
No. Philip only has 1 L. This Philip. Generally, Philip in English will have 2, but this Philip has 1. Other questions?